Welcome to another edition of the Financial Puzzle Playbook with your host, Jim Sumpter. I'm RJ Malik, producer of this podcast. And Jim, I see you have a guest, so why don't we just jump right into it? Introduce your guest and the topic you'll be talking about on this podcast.
That's perfect, RJ. Good morning. First of all, to you, it is morning in Birmingham. It's also sunny, which is nice. So today we have with us Jillian Berry, who is the Senior Director of StrongHer Money. We're going to get into what that means in just a little bit. But Jillian is a resource that I have with RFG. You know, one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast is this generational transfer of wealth that is going to be happening. And in fact, there was a Cirilli report, which a lot of advisors have really delved into. And it projects that there is going to be between now and say the next 20, 25 years, $104 trillion that will pass down from generations. And that by the year 2030, which is actually not that long from now, women will control 67% of the wealth in this country. So we have an initiative at our firm called StrongHer Money. Jillian is senior director of that. And the whole purpose of that is to empower women to be financially fearless. And so we're going to delve in, jump in. But before we do that, so Jillian, you're in Bozeman, Montana. It snowed there yesterday.
It did.
And it did not snow in Birmingham. So welcome to the South.
I'm glad one state has spring.
One state does have spring. We do have spring. We have pollen too. So
yes, figured that out yesterday.
You did. Okay, very good. So as a brief introduction, I always ask, we're going to do just a couple of rapid fire questions just to kind of get to know you. Favorite color?
Favorite color is yellow.
Yellow? Oh, I love that. I love that. I don't think I've ever had that answer before. Favorite car that you've ever owned?
I have 4 kids. I don't own fancy cars.
Okay. Do you have a minivan though?
I used to have a minivan.
Okay, you used to have a minivan.
Yes.
Okay, was that the favorite?
That was not the favorite.
Okay.
That was my low.
Okay. How about favorite book?
My favorite book, I actually love the book Creative Inc. And that is a story about how Pixar really became successful in their design and creative teams.
Oh, fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Fabulous. And being a director of an initiative, I know you're all about design, creative, helping advisors, things like that. So we're going to jump into some of this. So I mentioned this generational transfer. Okay, as money transfers from one generation to the next, and women will control a lot of the money. How does the decision making for someone that all of a sudden gets this influx of money? How does that really impact? And so let's all these questions, let's talk about that. Are there going to be any societal dynamics? Or is there going to be any shift? Or is it just going to be, oh, great, I've got money, now let's go?
Yeah, there will be a lot of shifts.
Okay.
I mean, definitely when we have a market that hasn't had as much attention as it's going to have in the next few years, with that type of attention, you will see different shifts in the market because there's different reasons why someone invests, why someone makes financial decisions. So when you have a market that has very specific needs and very specific ways that they'll think about money, that is going to impact the way that our market is going to shift.
Okay. So are you saying that the way that investments are now, that maybe, you know, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, you know, we work with females, we work with males, we work with couples. There generally seems to be one person in that family that sort of is the kind of go-to person on investments. One of the questions that I always ask people when I'm sitting down in the very beginning is, what are your feelings towards investing? And a lot of what we're talking about is what's happened in the past. And so the way the male in the family invests and the way the female in the family invest, a lot of times are different. And so, females tend to generally be a little bit more conservative. That's not always, and that is not a stereotype in any way. It's just a generalization that I've observed. Do you feel like as this happens that you'll see females still be conservative, or will it be a little bit more aggressive, or do we know?
So women tend to think in more socially. So when we think of making a decision, we tend to think of everyone else around us before we think of ourselves. And so that also comes to long-term decision making and protecting our assets and protecting those around us. So there's a lot more decision making that goes into that long-term, like if I make a decision now, how is that going to impact me down the road? How is that going to impact my family, other people in my support system? We also tend to think socially in the sense of the types of investments that we're making. So we tend to invest for social impact or what's going to improve those situations around us. And so we're much more social thinkers, which does impact the way that we'll see that shift in investing.
So do you think from let's think philanthropic for a second.
Yes.
So do you think from a philanthropic standpoint that we may see a lot more money go towards philanthropy maybe than we do now? Or will it be a shift in the types of philanthropy, or could it be both?
I think it could be both.
Okay.
I definitely do see a shift in the way that women are making those choices, especially as they're receiving this, they're expected to receive $34 trillion by 2030.
Right.
And with that, with the mindset of let's do good with that money, we should see a shift in there.
So it's interesting. So as an advisor, when I'm working with someone and I had a client that have been clients for over 25 years that I've worked with, the husband and wife. The husband passed away a couple of months ago. And so now, even though we had talked about it, we talked about all the what ifs, we talked about the when this happens, everyone was sort of expecting it at some point, and it wasn't sick. It's just, it happens. And so now it's interesting because all of the conversations that we've had are now sorting to come to fruition, and she's making decisions, some of them the same as what we had talked about, some of them differently. So when we have a life change, and a lot of times it may be a death or a divorce or some big family dynamic shift, I always tell people don't make rash decisions for at least 6 months.
Yes.
And a rash decision could be a myriad of things. Like, in other words, don't go sell your house for at least 6 months. Let's think about it. Let's get through. We have to have a little bit of a time to grieve, things like that. Is that what you see with females, that they're, they have all these great and grandiose plans, but then when it does happen, are we taking a step back? And because I think that is part of what this whole shift could be, because everybody's thinking, oh my gosh, now this has happened, I've got to do all these things that I thought about doing. Do they actually do it, or do we take a step back, take a deep breath, and begin to reflect?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things within that conversation. So first...
Oh, I set you up for about 10 questions.
Yes, you did.
Exactly.
So first, when someone receives an inheritance, that usually comes with the same moment of experiencing grief. Because a lot of the times when someone's receiving something, that means that somebody else may have passed away. There's a life shift. So there's navigating a sense of loss while receiving something at the same time. So there's a lot of emotions that are happening when this transition happens. And so if that person isn't educated or hasn't experienced that type of wealth when they have received something, there is an influx of not only emotions, but, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? And when you're basically putting those two together, there's a lot of confusion. You can feel overwhelmed. You might feel super vulnerable in that situation. And so that's a moment of needing to pause and needing either financial literacy or having somebody come alongside to help make effective decisions with that money. The other thing that we might see is a woman might not have been the primary decision maker in their finances. They may have left it up to their spouse. They may not have been involved in the long-term investments in their marriage. There's a lot of reasons why women may not have been that primary decision maker. And so then all of a sudden when you're left with, oh my goodness, now I have to make these decisions that I haven't been a part of or I know very little of, again, that makes a situation where they can feel vulnerable and lost. And I know that we are making a lot of strides in the way that financial advisors and financial planners are working together with clients to make sure that both people in the relationship are being able to come to the table and have clarity on their finances together. But we have seen in the past that that's not a trend.
Okay.
And so going forward, when someone has received that inheritance and they are lost, then what do they do? If they
Right.
don't have that help, what are they doing? And so that's really where we're seeing that need for more financial planners and more financial advisors to come alongside their clients in these situations.
So let me ask you this, and I'm reminded of a story that my grandmother used to tell, which she was a World War II generation.
Mhm.
Okay, and I think that generation is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's part of what's going to transfer down. But it's almost like their children are now the baby boomers.
Mhm.
That's almost kind of who's going to be passing down the assets and the wealth and things like that. But let me go
Yes.
back to the World War II generation. When my grandfather passed away, my grandmother had never pumped gas
Yeah.
before. Okay. Now we're talking about financial literacy versus pumping gas. Those are two very
Yes.
different things, but the concept is still sort of the same. It's still kind of what you're talking about in that the male society had always done certain things. And then there's been this shift, I think, over the past many, many, many years. And I know this is part of what your dissertation is,
Yes.
and you know this much better than I do. But I think that there's this shift where females are trying to be involved in more, making sure that they understand more things. And so when that baby boomer generation passes down and then passes down to my generation and then passes down to my kids' generation, do you think that each generation as we move down that both the male and female are going to be more equal? Is that what we're seeing? Because that's what I'm seeing as an advisor when I'm working with different age groups.
Yeah. So I think of this in two different ways.
Mhm.
First, I know that my generation experienced this in the sense that in school, they don't really talk about how to manage your money.
Right.
And so the examples that we received we were receiving those by our parents' generation if we got any formal literacy on how to do your finances. So if we weren't getting it from our education system and we were only receiving it from our parents or our grandparents, that has set up a trend going downward that however you were raised is kind of how you are going to continue to think about money going forward. But when we started to see over this last decade of a lot more financial technology coming out and the younger generation really being heavy in technology use, we now see a much younger generation wanting to invest. So I think I'm pretty sure I actually have the stat right here, is that 40% of women under the age of 21 have already opened up some form of investing account.
Wow,
And that's attributed,
awesome.
that's attributed to a lot of the technology use
Right.
and the information that's now being put out there that is at the grasp of everyone's hands. Yeah.
So I'm seeing that in my personal family. So, you know,
Yes.
we've, a lot of people have met on this podcast, my daughter, Cassidy, who is about to be 21. She's actually also recently engaged. And
Mhm.
so what she did, I guess we were talking 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I said something about moving money from her savings account, which I'm on, to her checking account, which I'm on. And she said, "Oh, I'll just move it from my Acorn account." And I
Yes.
was like, "Wait a minute, what? You have an Acorn account?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, every time I get a paycheck, I put some money into that." I had no idea.
Mhm.
And here she set this up unbeknownst to me. And I'm like, "Well, what are you doing with that?" So I started asking some questions, and she was like, "Well, Dad, you know, that's what we do." And I said, "Where did you learn about that?"
Yes.
You know, and she said, "Oh, well, we all talk about it." So I was sort of amazed. So I think we're seeing that as a trend, which is a good trend, because I've also done episodes on this podcast where I talked about one of my biggest frustrations is the lack of financial literacy. And so it sounds like what you're saying is we're seeing more financial literacy to some degree. It needs to be a whole lot more. Let me ask you this: unique challenges.
Yes.
Are there unique challenges with females versus males?
There absolutely are.
Okay.
So when I look at the program that we're building out for StrongHer Money, we're looking at all the different life transitions a woman would possibly experience.
Okay.
That can be anything from negotiating salaries, taking time off of work for child caregiving, taking care of your parents. It looks like what a woman's experiencing possibly during divorce or widowhood. There's so many transitions that women experience. I mean, obviously males experience
Sure.
different life transitions as well, but especially during caregiving and having to step away from work to take maternity leave, or, you know, having to step away because women tend to be the caregiver of the parent when they get ill. There's unique challenges that women face that really do impact their long-term savings, their long-term investments, because of having to step away and to take care of very specific needs.
Hi everyone, I'm Cassidy, the second C in CMC Financial. So dads sometimes get on a roll with this podcast and might forget to remind you about a few things. 1, don't forget to like and share this podcast and leave a review. 2, follow CMC Financial on all of the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And 3, go check out the website at cmcfp.com. Okay, back to my dad. He's probably still talking.
Okay, so let's jump back into what you just talked about a second, because this is actually fascinating to me. You said that the younger generation are having to take care of things differently than they have. I know you and I did an event for our team this past weekend.
Yes.
It was a female-oriented event. It was amazing. And one of the things that I talked about was this sandwich generation.
Yes.
Which is the person who is trying to raise children, and at the same time, something happens to mom or dad. And the female generally becomes the caregiver, or at least taking care of the needs. So they're sandwiched in between these two very different generations and very different things that they have to do, while at the same time being a mom, being a wife, working, all of the things that women do. And so as you make these shifts, is that what you're talking about, is making sure that you know, women feel financially fearless. We're empowering them. So Jillian, let me ask you this. I know that during COVID, of course, we were all working from home, and, you know, it was going to be a 2-week period, and then it turned into a month, and then it turned into a long time.
Yes.
And a lot of people got used to working from home, being able to remote work. Okay. Now let's shift fast forward to 2025. A lot of people are being asked to come back to the office 5 days a week. Are we seeing a shift in that, and how does that affect women as they're in this whole sandwich generation thing? What are we seeing trend wise there?
Yeah. So women tend to be that primary caregiver. It tends
Right.
to fall on women.
Okay.
That's obviously is not all the case, but that is the trend.
Right.
And so during COVID, as we saw this balance between families taking care of their children and working, and now having to go back into the office, that pressure of having to have that balance is another perfect example of the impact towards women of, do we make the decision to now find a new job that I can work from home because that was better for my family? Or now do I have to be forced to go back in the office 5 days a week and sacrifice my personal mental health and my wellness, and that to balance child caregiving, working 5 days a week, possibly taking care of a sick parent? Like, that pressure for women is enormous when we're trying to think about those like financial impacts that have, like, we're thinking about financial wellness and health. And there's a very fine line balance between being financially healthy and being physically healthy.
Well, so we've talked a lot about this generational transfer, but what you're saying is, what if we even haven't had a generational transfer? In other words, it's just our daily, we're trying to make sure all the bills are paid, doing all the things. And I can imagine that, if you're at home being able to work remote, maybe there's a little difference in childcare costs. Maybe there's a little difference in, your money that you put into the gas tank and things like that. And so you're balancing this whole scenario. Then if you do have this life event that we've talked about, I can see how that's a really big impact. And I know that's part of what StrongHer Money is all about, is giving advisors the tools so that we can advise clients. Because, on this, we've talked a lot about our puzzle pieces.
Yes.
And, I all the time am saying everyone has this financial puzzle, and we've all heard this story and me say it. But these are all impacts to your financial puzzle. And I talk about, my scenario of the dog coming in and hitting the table and a fourth of your puzzle falls off. The fourth of the puzzle falling off could be you're being asked to go back to work 5 days a week.
Yes.
It could be, you now have a child going to college that was here. It could be mom now needs care. It could be, we're expecting again. All of these things that could affect your financial puzzle, that is also a change. And I would think it affects women differently than men. Because let's be honest, there was a book, what was it? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. That was written for a reason.
Yes.
Because we are different. We do think differently. And I think that what you're doing in your role to empower advisors to be able to help females, I think that's an amazing thing. And I'm seeing a lot of trends towards that.
Yeah, and I'd like to touch on one other thing
Sure.
in this topic right here, is that every life transition, everything that pops up unexpectedly, there is a cycle of resilience. Like, you have to either make it through successfully or you don't. And so part of that process is really understanding the environment that you're in, understanding the tools that you need to come out of that situation successfully. But what happens in that resilience process is that women and men, again, think very differently about their environments. So again, women are very social thinkers. They put a lot of people before themselves to make sure that there's the wellness of all the collective. But also, when we think about resilience, we think about like motility of resources, what's available to women in that situation, in that life transition, that will help them become successfully resilient. What's their support system look like? What like literacy do they have to make an informed decision? There's a lot of those little aspects that we look at to make sure that women are making it through each of those life transitions successfully.
Right. So that's one thing that we would want to encourage people to do, because I always tell people, let's please don't get your information from TikTok.
Yes.
Okay. Let's make sure we're using good resources. We have good third party resources that we can bounce ideas off of. I know I get questions a lot about very random things. So we have a new intern that's working with us this summer, and she came in for the first time yesterday. And I said, one thing that you always have to realize is you never know what that phone call is going to be.
Yes.
And she was actually sitting in my office, and I think I got a couple of different phone calls, totally different random things that had nothing to do with investments, but had everything to do with life.
Yes.
And it had everything to do with their specific situation and their perspective. And they were calling a trusted advisor to talk about these things. I think that's kind of what you're talking about, which makes my whole point.
And we can touch on that even with perspectives too, because when we're looking at a multi-generational perspective, we actually touched on this at your event, is that each generation has very specific needs and perspectives in this moment. So we're looking at older generations having very specific needs around health and comfort. And my generation right now, we're in the thick of raising children and balancing our work schedules. So that's really what we're focused on. And we make decisions that really impact that world.
Right.
And then our children are really focused on social aspects and maybe possibly school, social events. And so we have these different generations who have different needs. Even within the female setting, we have very, very specific needs. And we think very differently based on our environment.
Wow, it's very interesting. We're going to delve more into that. We're going to do a part 1 and a part 2. So this is part 1. The next podcast that we do will be at part 2, because, you and I were talking and I was like, we can't cram all of this into one episode. So as we wrap this episode, what are some final thoughts around these topics that you would like to, make sure everyone knows?
Yes. So some of the things that I would really like to touch on is that, women are powerful. Women have unique needs and they have barriers, but they are extremely powerful. They are intelligent. And so really being able to serve this very specific market is beneficial to our entire society. Like we're making great decisions. It's just the fact that as we're seeing this generational wealth transfer, that it's really important to have the right resources, the right knowledge, the right community to serve this market well.
Right. That's great. That's great. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Let me ask you, if someone wanted to get in touch with you or just, bounce a question off, what would be the best way to do that?
Definitely LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm on there all the time.
You are on LinkedIn.
But you can find me under Jillian Berry.
Jillian Berry.
Yes.
Okay. RJ, I'll throw it back to you, but I will just mention, with CMC Financial, the best way to get us is our website is cmcfp.com. We're on all of the social media channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. And then you can always reach out to me. My direct number is 205-510-9074.
All right, that sounds good. And thank you for listening to the Financial Puzzle Playbook podcast. We ask you to share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, because this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you for listening. And for everyone at the Financial Puzzle Playbook, I'm RJ Malik, and we'll see you at the next podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Puzzle Playbook. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Don't forget to follow us on social media by checking the links in the description. And contact us today by visiting our website at www.cmcfp.com or give us a call at 205-510-9074. Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security, or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of CMC Financial. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, Private Client Services, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by CMC Financial or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Securities offered by registered representatives of Private Client Services, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. Private Client Services, CMC Financial, and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.